Since probability sampling methods are the ideal ones but are not very practical, we need to look at some other sampling methods and we need to figure out what good features they have and what bad features they have. So these other methods, which are not based on an assessment of the probability of each member of the population to be selected, are called, for obvious reasons, non-probability sampling. And there are several of them. I'm going to have to say some bad things about these methods, but don't become too paranoid about them, in the sense that yes, these are methods which are to be taken very with great care, and that may lead to some major problems. However, from the realistic point of view of us poor people here on earth who have to do things as well as we can under the circumstances, these are still good methods, and so these are the methods in fact that you're going to see being used quite often. Not exclusively, and we don't want to use them all the time, and you want to be careful about them, but they are being used. So generally speaking, non-probability methods are also called convenience methods because they are convenient. As I said, the probability methods are the ideal ones. The reason why we don't use them is because sometimes it's unrealistic to be able to use them, and so we call them convenience sampling. The way they work out is simply that we select a sample through some easy, simple, or inexpensive method, and we do the best we can. So it looks simple enough and reasonable enough. So what are the problems associated with that? Well, obviously one of the problems is that if we use convenience sampling, we run a high risk of creating a bias. It's easy to end up underrepresenting some important subgroups of the population, and this is one of the main problems. And the other problem associated with it is that quite often we have no idea of whether this underrepresentation has occurred or not, and sometimes we're not even aware that it may have occurred. So this total or major ignorance about what's affecting the sample and what's not does not really allow us to say much about how representative the sample is of the population. And because of that, the sample may provide misleading information. If we end up with a convenience sampling, then sometimes what the sample that we collect and the information we get from the sample may have nothing to do with what's going on in the whole population, but only with what's going on in a small, very selected part of the population. Now, can we actually use these kind of sampling methods, or should we throw them away? No, they can be accepted, but with some care. Again, they are realistical methods, and so we need to use them, but be aware of their limitations. So be careful when assessing them, and be careful when you are analyzing the results they produce, and don't go overboard in accepting them uncritically. So having talked about these non-probability sampling methods in general, let's see which ones they are. I'm going to list some of the more common ones as usual, and just to give an idea of what we're talking about. So some of the common convenience sampling methods include things like street surveys. Now by street surveys I don't necessarily mean something done in the streets. It could be done in a mall or in any public place, including sometimes a hospital. The idea here is that you go to a place where you're likely to find members of your population, and you try to select them as they come. For instance, it could be in some central place in the college, or among your friends, and whatever location that you find convenient to use. Of course, the limitation of this method is the fact that you are restricting yourself only to people who happen to be there at a given time of day in that location and who are willing to be interviewed for the survey. So again, it has limitations, but it is very, very convenient. Another one is mail-out questionnaires. These are some of the most dangerous ones. They are used very extensively, but they have a major flaw, and that is that they rely on the participation of the people. People have to decide, okay, I'm going to fill this questionnaire and mail it back to the people who sent it to me. And normally what happens is that this is done only by people who feel very strongly about the issue in question. And so people who don't feel very strongly may decide that it's not worth their while to fill the questionnaire, send it back, and so on. And so that can create a very strong bias. So unless your questionnaire, unless your population has to consist of people who feel strongly about a certain event, you don't want to use mail-out questionnaires. Another one is a volunteer call. Again, self-selection. That's what it's called. So you're asking, okay, can you please come and participate? I'm not going to select you, you select yourself. And this is a problem because once again, the volunteers may have something in common which makes them either feel very strongly about the issue or have some vested interest in it, and therefore the results can be biased. Okay, snowball methods are also sometimes used where you say, okay, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to come along, and so on. Again, same idea of self-selection. The other thing is also single cluster in a lead locale. This sounds like a very strange expressions, but it's pretty much a street survey where, however, the location has been selected not in terms of the population you want to collect your sample from, but in terms of some other criteria which makes that population very biased in one way or the other. Again, I'm talking about biased in the statistical sense. So what you do, let's say you want to do a survey at the college, and let's say that you're actually only going to do the survey in the far side. Well, you're only going to get the people who are in the far side, and in this kind of situation, if we're talking about, say, something having to do with consumption of alcohol or social life at the college and so on, you're going to have a very partial view of whatever topic you're trying to collect information about. There is another method called purposive sampling, and this is a method that really does not belong into statistical analysis, because what we do in purposive sampling is we select people according to whether they are whether we think that they can give us good information or not. So we're not randomly selecting, we're definitely putting a big bias, we're only selecting people who have certain characteristics, but this kind of method is very useful for qualitative studies, and you're going to learn about those next year. But they should definitely be avoided when we're doing quantitative studies. So this is one method that definitely you don't want to use when we're doing anything involving statistics. So we've seen some of the probability methods, some of the non-probability methods, and we've had a quick look at the pros and cons of both of them. Let's look at what actually happens in practice. Well, in practice, what people do is they base their sampling on some kind of a composite method. Okay, what they do is they would like to use some randomness. That's good, just like broccoli is good for you. Randomness is good from the statistical point of view. Maybe they use some clustering. That's also good, and add some flavor, right? And you can use some stratification that may add some spice to your whole enterprise. But eventually you have to use some convenience, and that means that you have to throw in something that may not be so good for you biologically, like pasta, but it makes everything glue together and work. So this is the reality of the situation, and your job will be to try and identify to what extent each of these aspects are being used in a given survey or in a given research study, so that you can understand how how reliable the results of this study are going to be.